Alright, so last week what we did was we were looking at the opening and the opening principles, right? And there were 8 of these opening principles. Now, if you need a refresher, you can always just go back and watch that recording on YouTube. So it's posted under like learning the opening principles. That's the like video title. Alright, and so today we're gonna so we know that there's 3 parts to the game, right? There's the opening, the middle game, and the end game. So we learned about the opening and the opening principles and what you're supposed to do in that part. And the middle game is something that I'm going to look at next class, which is going to be our last class. And in that class, it's because the middle game is a bit more complicated and you need to know the end game before you know the middle game. So today we're looking at some important parts of the end game, and namely this is the pawn end game. So a pawn endgame is basically when you have a king and your opponent has a king, right? And both of you only have pawns, so there's no other pieces. So you guys don't have knights, no bishops, no queens, no rooks, just kings and pawns. And this endgame is really common because a lot of times you'll end up uh, losing all your like normal pieces and both sides will only have kings and pawns. So you guys need to we need to learn this uh, in depth, and then after that it we'll go back to the middle game and look at how we should get a better position for the end game. All right? Okay, so let me start by sharing my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen? All right, so let's start with the pawn endgame, right? So basically, an important thing we're gonna need to know about the pawn endgame is something called opposition. All right. Now there's a few major things we need to know. So there's opposition. There's gonna be flanking, and there is going to be like some special exceptions that we're also gonna look at. All right. So let's start off with opposition. Okay. So opposition occurs between the two kings. Okay, so if there's other pieces, it also works, but mainly it's with the two kings. Okay, and basically what opposition is when the two kings are directly in front of each other with one square in between. Now, did we look at this last class? Did we look at do you guys remember, or here I can check really quick. All right, yeah. So we did not. Okay, I just had to make sure because I started getting confused with that other class. But so we did not look at opposition or anything like that last class, right? Okay, so now what opposition is when the two kings are directly in front of each other. And why is this important? So now if you see the two kings, now a king can move one square in every direction, right? We learned that at the beginning of the class. So if the king can move one square in every direction, then the opponent's king can move one square in every direction, right? Now you'll see that these 3 squares, both kings can move to that, okay? But the problem is the two kings can never be like touching each other. They can never be like exactly next to each other. So this white king, it can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. This black king can't go here, can't go here, or can't go here. Now what does that mean? So why is it important that neither king can go to these 3 squares? Now the best way to explain this is through something called, let's just like have a race, alright? So, now here, we got the opposition, okay? And I'll explain what that means in a moment. But let's just uh, go with this for now. So, our race is going to be between the two kings, okay? So this king, our white king, it's gonna try and get to this row, alright? Anywhere along the 8th rank is the 8th rank, okay? Then this black king, it's gonna try and get anywhere along the 1st rank, alright? So now let's see who wins, okay? So now it starts off like this, and we start by moving our king up, because now the two kings are directly in front of each other and they have opposition, right? Now if the king could, black king would want to go here, and then it would start running down, right? But the problem is it can't move forward. So it's basically stuck. It can only move back, which would make it lose the race, or it can move to the side. Alright, so now let's say it moves to the side. Now if we want to keep going this way, we obviously can't go here, and we can't go here, right? Now like in this position, these 3 squares are guarded by the black king. But now when the king moves here, only these 2 squares. That means that this square is still open, right? That means we can move our king here. Now both kings go up the court, or up the field. Alright, now look, our king got here a move earlier than the black king. And why is that? That was because in the beginning over here, black's king was forced to move to the side instead of being able to move up. So like let's say black's king moved over here, if it could. It obviously can't because that's illegal. But let's just say for example purpose, it could move over here, okay? Then our king would go over here, then here. And you'll see that in the end, both our kings will reach at the same time. Even though our white king reaches on they reach on the same move basically, because one move isn't exactly just king d4. One move is king d4, king e6, okay? Like that. One move is a one white move and one black move put together. That's one like move, alright? So, yeah. Instead of there being, like you see on the notation here, it looks like there's 10 moves, right? But in reality, it's only 5 because it counts one white move and one black move. Alright? So now, that is why opposition is important, because you don't allow the opponent's king to move forward. Oop. Now, if the opponent's king can't move forward, then they have to move to the side, right? And then we can go around them. So basically, if we moved here, then we could go to the other side, right? And let's say the black king went here, then we could go to the other side. Alright? And this technique, where we move to the opposite side of the opponent's king, this is called flanking. Okay? And so, let's just take a quick look at, actually, I think let's just try to explain it with this. So, now the reason flanking is important is because you can, let's say you had a pawn over here. Now, if the king goes here, we can like protect the pawn, right? On these 3 squares and allow it to just move forward. So, for example, let's go over here. Now, same example, except there's a pawn here, alright? Oh, what happened? Okay, so we had this example, except now all we're doing is we are going to add a pawn, alright? Now this is the basic position in a king and pawn endgame, okay? It's where one side has an extra pawn and you need to win with an extra pawn. Now, you obviously can't win with a pawn, right? You can't checkmate with only a pawn. So how would you win this? Does anybody know how we could win with a king and pawn if we can't checkmate with only these 2 pieces? Aryan?
The pawn can move down and become a queen.
Exactly. Remember at the first few weeks of this class, we learned that the pawn, if it gets all the way to the end of the opponent's side, then we can change it into a queen bishop, knight, or rook, right? And while we can't checkmate with a bishop or a knight, we can checkmate with a queen or a rook. So if we were able to change our pawn into a queen, then we'll be able to checkmate pretty easily, right? We learned how to do that in one of our previous classes. So now, with this in mind, we are going to use this pawn and try to get it all the way down, turn it into a queen, and then use our knowledge of how to checkmate with the queen to checkmate. Alright? Arian, do you have a question?
Yeah, why can't the opponent's king and your king be together? Like, why can't they be e like uh, why can't one king be why can't your king be on
Mm.
d4 and then the opponent's king is on d5? Like, why can't they be near each other?
Yeah, so the reason that is because let's say my king was over here and his king moved to d5, okay? Let's pretend that was possible. Then I could say that I'll take his king. And we know that we can't take a king in chess. So it's just like a rule of chess that the two kings can never be touching. Just like another rule maybe like when the king is in check, you have to do something to the king. You can't just leave the king there, right? It's just one of those rules of chess that you have to obey. All right. So, now we are going to use our knowledge of opposition and flanking that we just learned about to try and checkmate with, promote the pawn and then checkmate, right? So, now the first thing, what we need to learn is that when you're defending, so defending means you have less material, so white has an extra pawn, so black is defending, right? Now, when black is defending, what he has to try and do is he has to get the opposition. And what does it mean to get the opposition? Which is what we're going to learn right now. So let's say I move my king up here. Now, my king is directly in front of his king, okay? So, whose ever turn to move it is when it's it's right now we're in opposition, right? Because the two kings are directly in front of each other. This we're in opposition, okay? Whose ever turn to move it is, they do not have the opposition. So whoever just moved the king into opposition, they have the opposition. And what does that mean? So let's say we moved over here, okay? Then the black king moved over here. Now black has the opposition because it's white's turn to move and he can't move forward. In our previous example over, I think chess.com is glitching. Okay, but let's say the king moved up here. Now white has the opposition because it's black's turn to move and he can't move forward. Alright? So now let's see a few examples of if you guys understand who has the opposition or not. Also, it doesn't have to be directly like this, right? If it's let's say, this. Now this is also opposition. The two kings are directly in front of each other and there's a square in between. Alright? Okay. And yeah, those are the two kinds. We might learn about diagonal opposition next year when we resume these classes, which is like a slightly more advanced thing. I'll just give you a slight idea, which is like this. They're diagonal and there's one square in between. And that works slightly differently. Okay, so now I've told you that opposition can go either way, right? It can be front. Okay, let me just set up the position. Let's do this. Alright, now this is an example to see if you guys understand who has the opposition. So let's say white moves over here. Okay? Now they're in opposition, right? There's a square in between. Now who has the opposition? White or black? I'll give you guys until 5:49 and then everyone's gonna answer. So the question is, who has the opposition? White or black? Okay, so let's go around. So we'll start with Anu. Who do you think has the opposition, white or black?
White.
Okay. And now let's go to Nicholas.
I think white.
Okay. Uh, Aryan.
White.
Okay. Ian.
White.
All right, and Mateo or Javier.
White.
All right. Yeah, nice. You guys are all correct. White has the opposition, right? Now, because it's black's turn to move, that means he can't move forward, and that means white has the opposition. All right, let's do one more example. Say black goes here, you go here. Now black just played king to e5. Okay, and it's glitched again. Alright, now black just played king to e5, and now they are in opposition, right? So who has the opposition now? White or black? This one, you could just raise your hand if you know the answer. Alright, Javier? Oh, Javier, did you get the answer? Alright, let's go to Ian.
White.
Okay, how about Aryan?
Oh, what was the question again?
Who has the opposition here? White or black? Black just moved the king to e5, and now they're in opposition. So who has the opposition?
Um. Uh. Uh. uh Black.
Alright. Right, now you guys are both correct. So, sorry. I mean, wait, who said black? It was Aryan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, black is correct. So, now, because black was the one who moved, right? Now it's white's turn to move. So he can't move towards the black king. That means he has to move to the side or he has to move backwards, right? So that means that now black has the opposition, right? So that is what it means to have the opposition, okay? So now let's go back to our example. We have the king and then we have our pawn, right? And we're trying to promote it. So let's see how we are going to do that. So first, now I was telling you about how if you're the defending side, then you have to try and get the opposition, right? So you have to always try and get your king in front of the opponent's king so it can't move forward. If you're the attacking side or the one who wants to promote, then what you have to try, you also like you want the opposition still, but it's not as important as pushing your pawn. You still want to push your pawn at the same time. So you shouldn't just be getting the opposition. You should use the opposition and flanking to push your pawn. So how does that look? So it starts with getting the opposition, right? So we would do that by playing king to d4. Now we have the opposition. Okay? Now black has to move to the side or to behind, right? Now what is he going to do? So let's say he moves to the side, okay? Now if he moves to the side, what we do is we use flanking. And now if we're flanking, these 3 squares are covered, then the opponent's king moves to the side. Now only these 2 squares are covered and this square is open, then we're going to move the king there. Now black is going to try, and we said he wants to get the opposition, right? So where is black going to move his king to get the opposition? Nicholas?
The black king is gonna move to e4. Or, I mean, e5.
Alright, and Aryan?
Wait, did you say where the black king will move?
Yeah.
He'll move to e5.
Alright, nice, exactly. Now the black king is going to move to e5, right? And now he has the opposition. Now we said that the opposition, when there's opposition, the king has to move back or to the side, right? But that's only if you only have the king. In this case, we also have a pawn. So instead of moving our king, we could instead move our pawn. Now we can move it 2 squares or we can move 1 square, but best, yeah, we want to promote quickest, right? So we can checkmate the fastest. So we'll move it 2 squares. Now we have a check. Our king is defending our pawn, so the black king can't take, right? There's only 2 kings. It's obviously a draw, so yeah. Now our pawn is giving check. Now the king can go down, up, or backwards, because now, if you see, it's there. The kings are in opposition, right? But it's black's turn to move. That means white has the opposition. It's kind of like opposite, right? So now if white has the opposition, that means that black can't move forward. He has to move to the side or back. Let's just say he moves to the side up here. Now, after this, we need to keep getting the opposition, right? So where do we move our king to get opposition? It's white to play. Anu?
c6.
Exactly, nice. The king moves to c6, and now since they're directly in front, that means that the black king can't move forward, and he can't move here because the pawn is guarding that square. So now he only has 4 squares, so he keeps moving up. Now, if we go up again, what's the problem? Black will just move back down, and then we'll keep going here, and black will move up, and then that's not getting us anywhere, right? So instead, what we're going to do is, we are going to push our pawn. Okay, we pushed our pawn. Because remember, it's not always, we said that if we're attacking, then we have to try and get the opposition, but it's also important to push our pawn. We shouldn't just be focused on getting the opposition, or else the game will go nowhere. Okay, so now, let's say the black king, he wants to guard the square that the pawn is going to go, right? The pawn wants to go to this square to get turn into a queen, so black will guard that square. So let's say he goes over there. Now to get the opposition, we move our king in front of the black's king, right? Now he can't move to the forward, and he can't move back because that'd be out of the board. So he only has 2 squares to the side. Now, do you guys remember flanking? Now if the king goes here, it was here before, the king goes there, what square would we put our king on to flank the opponent's king? Remember, flanking is meaning to go to the opposite side. Ian?
c7.
Nice, exactly. C7. Now, the king is flanking the opponent's king. And even if he gets the opposition, instead of moving our king, we can move our pawn, right? And now we have the opposition. He has to move to the side or he has to move back. And when he moves, let's say, up here, then we can keep pushing our pawn. It's still a check. And now, finally, we can turn our pawn into a queen. And from here on, we know how to checkmate with a queen versus a king, right? So we can use these two pieces and combine them and checkmate, right? So let's just go over this one more time. Oh, do you have a question, Nicholas?
No.
All right. So, in the beginning, we got the opposition, right, against black by moving our king. Now, black moved to the side, and then we used flanking. So we moved our king to the opposite side to be able to push our pawn. And you guys might wonder why flanking was so important. But if you notice, this king is guarding these three squares, right? So when the pawn is on any of these three squares, it'll be guarded by our king, and that means that it can't be captured. So it's basically like safeguarding our pawn. It's like being a protector or a bodyguard, if you want to put it like that, while the pawn marches up the board. So then now black tried to get the opposition, but we don't need to move our king because we do have another piece that we can move, which is our pawn. And we pushed our pawn two squares because we wanted to go, you know, to the edge of the board faster. Because the pawn can move two squares on the first move, but after that it can only move one square, right? Okay, now black just moved his king, and now we want the opposition. So why didn't we push our pawn here, you might ask? And the reason that is because there's like an important rule. You don't want your like king and your pawn in the same line, like the same row, right? Because then if black puts his king here, then we can't move here, but we also can't move and give opposition. If we can't give opposition, then it's going to be a lot more difficult, okay? So instead, try and always not let your pawn go right in the same line as your king, same row, because we won't be able to get opposition the next move, and instead of winning, it'll probably end up being a draw. Alright? And if we have an extra pawn that can turn into a queen, we most likely want a win instead of a draw, right? So here, I went too far. Okay, so here, promote. So now we want to give opposition, right? And when the king moves, we continue to push our pawn. Remember, see, look, they're still not in the same line. And finally, we put our king in front, because right now, if we push the pawn, then they'd be in the same line, right? And we don't want that. So instead, we give opposition, because if this pawn isn't here, then we can give this opposition. The king moves to the side. We again use flanking. Finally, these last three squares, now you can really see why flanking is important, because the king is guarding all three of these squares, and the pawn can just march up the board into a queen. And now we all know how to checkmate from here. So yeah, so now you guys can see how important opposition and flanking were. With combining these two ideas, we were able to get into a really good like endgame where we got the pawn up the board and we turned it into a queen, right? So does anybody have any questions about this endgame? Ian?
Yeah, like it's like that's like you're showing us the easiest way. Are there like way more easy ways than just that one?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it is pretty long, but this is the easiest way. So,
Oh,
yeah, it takes a while to win these kind of endgames. You need like a bunch of moves, and there's a few ideas you need to know. And so, other than that, if nobody has any other questions, let's move on to the last thing we'll probably look at. Oh, yeah, Nicholas?
I accidentally
Alright.
clicked on it.
Alright. So now we are going to look at some exceptions. Let's look at something else. So we're gonna learn about something called the rule of the square. Okay? And now this is gonna be extremely important. Uh, like probably for as long as you play chess. So the rule of the square is when you have a pawn, okay, just any pawn, and usually if it's in the we're mainly talking about a pawn in like one of the two last rows, but a lot of times it can be in the middle, and mainly the last two rows, okay, so the A file and the H file, okay. If you have a pawn here, then there's something called the square, and the square is where like how many squares the pawn is to to queening. So this pawn has one, two, three, right? So including the square that the pawn is on, you count that square. So there's four squares, okay? Until the pawn queens. Well, three squares until it queens, and there's four squares, okay? Then from there, you go to the right or to the left. But obviously we can't go to the left here, so we go to the right. Four squares. Now, these four squares. And then we just fill out the square, okay? And this is the square, okay? Now the rule of the square is an important concept if you're trying to defend. Now if there's like a king all the way up here, the rule of the square doesn't matter. White's gonna win anyways. But let's say the king is like super far in the corner, okay? So now black, if he can get to this pawn and capture it before it turns into a queen, then we win, right? Or white's gonna win because he's gonna have an extra queen and he'll obviously be able to win with that. So now we need black to try and go and capture this pawn, okay? But now what the rule of the square states is, now this is a square, if the king, if the black king gets in one of these squares, okay, is into one of these squares, then it's a draw. It's gonna be a draw, alright? So let me just set up a different position and you'll be able to see that pretty clearly. So now look here, alright? Now, including this square, right? So how many squares does it go until queening? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we go to the right, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we go up, just fill out the square, the rest of the square, right? So it just goes up, and then it fills out. And then the rest of these squares, right? Everything else in here. Okay? Now, if the king is within one of these red squares, it'll always be able to stop the pawn. Alright? It'll be able to stop the pawn. So let's say it's white to play, okay? Now we saw that this king was in the square, right? It's within somewhere in here. So now I'll prove to you that it'll be able to stop the pawn, okay? So now it's white to play, he pushes, okay? Now the square shrinked, right? Or shrunk. So now this is the square. It's no longer, before it was slightly bigger. Now it's just one square less. Now it's black to play. So if he wants to get in this square, he'll go here. Okay? Then white will push his pawn. Now the square shrunk even more. So now where would black move his king to get inside the square? Aryan?
Um, uh, D5.
Right. Now he'll go to d5. Now white will push again. Now the square is almost super small, right? Now black will keep moving in. And now where will the black king go? Nicholas?
The black king will go to B7.
Right. And now finally, when there's a queen, now it looks like white got the queen, right? So now it looks like it's all game over. So it's gonna be a win for white because he has a queen. Well, what's the problem? Ahmed or Ziad?
The black could capture the queen.
Exactly, right? There's nothing defending the queen, and that means that we can capture. Now, I think I forgot to put the king, but pretend there's a king somewhere, okay? It doesn't really matter. It's gonna be a draw because a king can't checkmate a king by itself. Alright? Nice. So, now you know about the rule of the square. So now let's go back to this example. Now, what is the square for this pawn? It is this, right? Now, all these squares, okay? Now, is it possible for, if it's black to play, let's pretend it's black to play, is black gonna reach the square? Is he gonna reach the square in time? Yes or no? Can black get within this square of this like pawn square in time? Can it reach? Anu?
Yes.
Okay, so Anu says it can. Aryan?
What I think the king won't get there when the pawn becomes even because like the king, it's like one square far away.
Alright, and last one, Nicholas.
Well, what's the question again?
Can black reach and stop the white pawn from queening? Is it close enough? It's black to play, by the way. Can black get there before the white pawn? Basically, is it in the square? Can it get in the square?
I think no, because every time with the king just goes one diagonally and the pawn just keeps going up and shrinks.
Exactly. Now that's important. The square keeps shrinking. Now this king, it's gonna move over here. Well, technically it's white to play, but like I put the position as white to play. But let's say the king moved over here. Okay. Now, if the king can't get in the square on the first move that he does, so on the first move that black makes, if he can't get into the square, he's never going to be able to. So let's just say I moved here, okay? A really bad move, but like it doesn't really matter. So now this is the square. Now, in the first move, is white in the square? Or is black in the square? No, right? He still didn't get in. And that means if we move up, then the square already shrunk. It's black is too late. So now he's gonna try and catch up. Now is he in the square? He's still not in the square. So we'll keep shrinking it. Now only these 4 squares are remaining. But black couldn't catch the pawn and we got it into a queen. Right? So now you saw that even though if just remember that if the opponent can't get into the square on the first move, on the first king move, then they won't be able to catch the queening pawn. All right. So now on the first move, the black king couldn't get into the square. That means that because the square keeps shrinking, uh, the black king will never be able to catch the pawn. All right. All right. Now we are going to look at one more example of this square, right? Rule of the square, which is this. Okay, now this is important. Okay, now let's count the square, right? We have to find out how big the square is. So the pawns here, I'm trying to go here, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 squares. So then we go to the right 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we can just fill out the square, right? Now, is the king in this square? Yes, right? It's in one of the red squares. That means it's within the square. So, theoretically, it should be able to go and catch the pawn in time. Okay? So, let's say the pawn goes here. Then the king Just be able to keep running, right? What is happening? Okay. And we caught the pawn in time, right? But let's go to the beginning. This actually isn't true. If the pawn is on the starting square, what's the special rule about the pawn? If it hasn't moved yet. Nicholas?
The pawn can, when the pawn is in the second row, it can move two steps.
Exactly. It can move 2 steps, right? Now instead of just moving one, like let's say the pawn is over here, it could only move one, right? Since it's in the second row, it hasn't moved yet, it can move 2. Now why is this important? Now look, usually the square shrinks one at a time, right? It goes from this big, and then it'll go to this big, then this big, and then so on, and then until it gets super tiny, right? But now, instead, it goes straight from here down to here. It just skipped one like entire step, and that means the king, now the square is this big. But even after the first move, even after the first move, black is still not in the square. And that means that black won't be able to stop the pawn, right? The pawn will make it there exactly one move early, right? One move early. And so, that means that black can't stop it. So, now I hope you guys learned about the rule of the square. Now, if you guys like need a review about any of this, I will post this on the YouTube channel. So if you need the recording, it'll be there in like probably an hour or so. And if you don't have any questions, uh, make sure to register for the tournament on the 18th. It is in like next week, so get ready for that. And our class next week, it will be our last class together this year, and because the tournament will be the last thing we do, and then I'll be restarting this class next year. So hopefully all of you make it here next week. All right. And if you have no questions, I will see you guys next week. Bye.
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 Bye.